All right, welcome back, everybody. We're now ready for a presentation on fumigation practices and safety techniques. Our speaker is Blake Buckner, Business Development Manager at Degesch America. Blake received his Bachelor's of Business Administration from Old Dominion University. He joined Degesch in 2022 as a summer intern and has spent his entire pest control career with Degesch. He is involved with developing internal and external training program focused on operations, management, fumigation, safety, product stewardship, and product development. So, Blake, I'll turn it over to you.
Morning, everyone. Just want to start by thanking CONVEY', Jess, Mark, and all the sponsors for the opportunity to speak. Listen to Rob speak first. I had my whole intro planned, and he sort of blew that out of the water, but it's for good reason. I was planning on giving you this super, in my mind, high-level view of fumigation and how it fits into your operations. And to be honest with you, he took it to the next level, and fumigation is one of those, I don't know what you call it at your facility, but it's really one of those lifesaver activities. When fumigants are applied correctly and you follow the label, they're basically 100% safe. But it doesn't take you long to go from the big pyramid to the small pyramid. So I'm going to give you a high-level view of one of the small little lifesaver activities. This is just a breakdown of the program itself. I'm going to give you a little bit of a Fumigation 101. It's short and dirty. It's not going to be, this is how you seal this is how you apply this specific fumigant. It's just a brief overview of that. We'll talk about the safe application of fumigants. Monitoring for efficacy, we'll spend quite a bit of time on that. Bystander safety, and materials fumigated in transit. So we'll start with a question. It's sort of a joke, and I'm going to ask for a little bit of audience participation. I know it's a little bit early. Hopefully we didn't take it too deep in Omaha last night. But just by show of hands, raise your hand if you've eaten in the last 48 hours. Okay? Now, if you've eaten farm to table, you picked it right out of your garden, you can go ahead and put your hand down. Okay? But everybody's already put their hands down, so you don't have to play along. I want you to raise your hand if you've been directly impacted by fumigation in the last 48 hours. Sort of a trick question. So for those of you that didn't raise your hands, I want you to open your mind up a little bit and think about the wheat and the flour that went into the hamburger bun was most likely impacted by fumigation. The chicken or the beef, well, the actual chicken or beef, hopefully that wasn't fumigated, but the facility that processed that, hopefully and most likely, was fumigated. And this isn't a self-serving thing. I'm not up here to say, have you hugged your fumigator today? That's obviously a joke, right? But it's really just to open your mind to how important fumigation really is. It's said that up to 10% of food can be destroyed by pests, and that's with fumigation, and that's in the Western world. That's in developed countries. It can be up to 50% in developing countries. So really, why we fumigate is to protect the food supply. That's the A1A, that's the number one. Also to minimize the risk of contamination via pests and to satisfy regulatory requirements. There's many others. We fumigate to keep the termites out of our houses. We fumigate for any number of reasons, but the big one for us, and a lot of this program is geared towards stored product pest control. And it's to protect our food supply. And that's the biggest reason we fumigate. So what do we fumigate? Again, I'm not going to hammer down into each one of these. But the short answer is almost anything that is infested, suitable, and safe. We'll talk a little bit in a second about what does suitable and safe mean. But really it's warehouses, flat storages, ships and barges, silos and bins, containers, rail cars, box cars, tarps, and food processing facilities. Those are the big ones. Again, it can go on and on. You can talk about chambers, houses, logs, but these are the main arenas that we're going to fumigate in. Now, how do we fumigate? I promised you I wouldn't go into deep detail. And one of the disclaimers I wanted to give you at the beginning is, a lot of my background is in phosphine. And I tried my best not to make this a promotion and go deep into phosphine. So I will say that if I don't address any of your questions or your concerns here or in the questions after, feel free to stop by the booth, shoot me an email. But really it comes down to these, and this is the high-level view of fumigation. We train, prepare, and plan meticulously. You train the applicator, usually to the label of the fumigant that you're going to use. You prepare your teams, you prepare your supplies. But planning is probably the most important part, okay? And the way that we plan in fumigation is through a fumigation management plan. And if you're conducting fumigations at your facility or you have individuals that you're subcontracting and you're not receiving or creating a fumigation management plan, it's really something you need to look at. It's the blueprint to a safe and successful fumigation. So that's what we do there. Then we move on to inspect thoroughly. Obviously, for an inspection, you're going to go in and you're going to look for a target pest. You're going to look for any number of things, but the biggest thing that you're looking for in an inspection is this target safe and suitable? And what that means is, can I seal it? Can I keep the fumigant in there for the allotted amount of time to keep the concentration in there and keep bystanders safe? As I just said, you're going to seal adequately. I say seal adequately, it should actually have like an asterisk there. Outside perspective is that we're going to create a completely gas-tight seal, right? We're going to keep all that gas in there for the entirety of the fumigation. Well, I hate to break it to you, but there's actually really not such thing as gas-tight. You can get it as close as possible, but the blessing and the curse of fumigants is how mobile they are. They're able to penetrate grain masses. They're able to penetrate, super sacks. But that also means that they're going to work their way through every screw hole, ground seal break. So there's really actually no such thing as gas tight. So seal adequately, not perfectly. Apply safely, you go through the label. The label of the fumigant will lay it out for you. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Monitor frequently, you're going to see that word a lot today. And I'm not going to apologize for it. There's a reason. That's the message, one of the big messages that I want you to take back with you. Monitoring is very important. Monitor frequently. That's both high range for efficacy and low range for safety. Aerate cautiously. It's something also that we're going to talk about in a much deeper manner later. And then release completely. That's a big one. A lot of times the line is blurred there on releasing. Whatever fumigant you're using, it's really loud, I apologize. Whatever fumigant you're using, you want to make sure that you release as per the label down to that number. Not almost, but all the way down to that number. And again, that's going to vary depending on the fumigant you're using. Okay, what are the primary goals of fumigation? Anybody? Primary goals of fumigation. Kill bugs? Good. Well, you got 1/3 of it. And I think I'm going to be speaking a lot of people's language in the room here. The primary number one goal of every fumigation is to do so safely. Now, of course, you've got timeline, you've got cost, you've got a bunch of factors after that, right? But the number one is that everybody goes home in the condition that they arrived, all their pieces and parts, lungs, to do so safely. Secondary to that is effective. You want to get your money's worth. Obviously, we want to kill the bugs, as you said. We'll talk about how to do that. And I put this up here as a joke, A lot of the guys, when I was in operations, a lot of the guys will tell you that one of my favorite things to say is, boy, I sure do love a boring fumigation. I love boring fumigations. Boring, boring, boring. Well, as I've transitioned into a different role, and I'm speaking before people like I am here today, turns out that from an HR and a recruiting perspective, boring may not be the best signal word. So we've sort of moved on 2022 using, we don't want to offend fumigation, so we've moved on to unsurprising. And really what that goes back to is planning and preparing and training meticulously. Now obviously there's going to be events that will come up during the course of a fumigation. They're going to be out of the ordinary. But we try our best not to be surprised by that. So those are the three main goals. Again, like I said, there are some other goals, but these are the primary goals. So what we'll do is we're going to leave unsurprising and boring behind, because if you conduct a safe and effective fumigation, most likely it's going to be unsurprising. So with the broad nature of the audience here, I broke it into sort of two perspectives. And this is how to apply fumigants safely. On the left, you'll see the fumigator's perspective. That's me, that's us. Or if you have people directly on your staff that are performing fumigations, these should be their goals. And on the right, obviously the fumigator is a stakeholder, but that's sort of the facility managers, the safety managers, even guys up into the C-suite, individuals up into the C-suite, sort of a broader perspective on how do we apply fumigants safely. We'll start on the left column. From a fumigator's perspective, the way that we apply fumigants safely is going to be to follow best practices through training and labels. You know, oftentimes, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars, have gone into the development of these labels, to these fumigant labels. Trial after trial, test after test. But really, they're your best resource for how to apply fumigants safely. A lot of times, they'll go through a step-by-step on how to apply fumigants safely. And as I said at the outset, if you follow these labels, they're almost 100% safe. So that's your best resource, is the label. Proper dosages. Once you've gone through your inspection, you've got your cubic footage of your target. From a safety perspective, it's important to go by the label and not exceed label maximums. I'm going to show my bias a little bit here. But there's really two things that come into play here with proper dosages. The first is, if you exceed or go higher than the dosage that you need, number one, you're breaking the law, which the label is the law. That notwithstanding, you're going to have a higher concentration when we start to talk about aeration down here at the bottom, right? So what goes in must come out. It's going to take you much longer to aerate it. So you want to make sure you get adequate dosage in there, but never exceed the maximum. And when I said I was going to show my bias, particularly when we talk about phosphine, you never want to exceed the label maximum. There's some dire consequences that we can discuss offline, but never exceed the label maximum. Sealing, check and maintain your seals. From a safety perspective, that's like your last line of defense, right? That's what's keeping your fumigant in from getting out to the people that don't want to see it, don't want to smell it, don't want to hear about it. It's your last line of defense. And that's where the monitoring comes in, right? That's how we apply the fumigant safely, is monitoring. Told you, you're going to hear it a lot today. Monitor, monitor, monitor. But monitoring really, from a safety standpoint, is low range readings. And it doesn't really matter what fumigant you're using. You should be conducting these readings, okay, from a fumigator's perspective. Early and often. We'll talk more about that in the bystander safety portion. Aeration, again, I have this, well, it didn't quite translate, but it's actually, that's supposed to be like bold. Aeration, and I'll tell you a little bit. When I started in the industry, my family, not knowing, man, be careful handling that stuff. Be careful handling that stuff. And of course, we're working with restricted use pesticides, so there is an inherent risk there, right? But the truth is, actually handling and applying the fumigant it needs to be taken with care and applied per the label, but that's not really the most dangerous part. I guess statistically, the most dangerous part is driving to the fumigation, but after that, the most risky part of a fumigation is going to be aeration. Why? Well, it's because at that point, you're going to be potentially exposed to the highest levels of the fumigant. When you apply fumigants, generally you're either doing so remotely through lines or you're using a slow release fumigant. But when you go into these facilities to aerate, turn on fans, pull down seals, wearing your appropriate PPE, you're being directly exposed to the fumigant. If we're looking at it from a risk assessment, you're dead red. You're 8.5, 9, 10. You're on the high end. If you're looking at the entire fumigation process, that's where you're at the highest risk is for aeration, both to you as the fumigator and to the bystanders. It needs to be taken with care, and that's why it's highlighted. Again, my bias here a little bit with the deactivation, I'm just going to go through this really briefly. If you're using aluminum and magnesium phosphide, make sure that if that gas hasn't completely been reacted, that you follow the label on the proper deactivation techniques. So now on to the stakeholders' perspective, and hopefully this hits home with a lot of you in here. It says educate your teams. And what I mean by educate your teams is not just your fumigators. You want to educate anyone who may have a remote chance of coming in contact with the fumigants. Administrative assistants, truck drivers, custodial workers, anyone who has a remote chance. And what you want to educate them on, again, you don't need to teach them how to seal the silo. You just need to teach them what are the inherent risks, what are the fumigants we're using, and how do you avoid the risks. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be very time-consuming. We're talking 15, 20, 30 minutes. But you need to educate your teams. And if you are subcontracting your fumigations, or if you're doing it in-house, you need to hold your pest control operator accountable. You need to make sure that these things on the left, that they're adhering to these. And you need to demand and expect documentation therein, right? Make sure that you ask for training records, for safety records. How much fumigant are you using? What fumigant are you using? What's your aeration plan? Demand and expect the documentation of these things, because really what it is, and I was talking with an individual at our booth who I've sort of borrowed, I don't want to say stolen, but I've sort of borrowed this line here, brand protection from them. Jordan Rivera from FSS, right? And really that's what we're after here from a stakeholder's perspective. This is a brand protection move. If you're holding your fumigator or your PCO accountable on the left column, and they're doing all these things from a safety standpoint, then the things on the right come secondary, right? I was talking with my boss in the break, and we sort of go back to when we first started out as fumigators. This all goes back to the brand protection. When I first started out as a fumigator, you got 2 jobs, Buckner. You kill the bugs and don't show up on the news. And it's funny, right? But it really, we've got the safe, effective, and unsurprising, but really that fits right into that, because I can almost assure you this. From a safety perspective, from a fumigation perspective, if you or your organization show up on the news, it's almost 100% that it's not going to be positive news. So again, it's a brand protection move to follow these guidelines and safety guidelines on the right and the left, because at the end of the day, I'm not up here to tell you that the most expensive fumigation is the best fumigation. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is, if you're holding your PCO accountable and your fumigators accountable on the left side column, what seems like such a small line item, let's just say we're talking about a bulk motor vessel fumigation. 7, 8, 9 figures. Well, probably 7 figures, right? Yeah. It seems like such a small cost, but that can turn into a massive cost if the proper procedures aren't taken. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that can happen later. But really, again, I hate to belabor the point, but you need to look at fumigation not as you get in here, you kill the bugs, pat on the butt, great job. But if you hold your fumigators accountable on the left column, or if they're on your staff, you're obviously going to want to hold them accountable as well, then you're going to be properly protecting your brand. So let's switch gears a little bit, and we'll go to the effective. We'll talk about monitoring for efficacy. Why? Why do we monitor for efficacy? What is monitoring for efficacy, and how is efficacy monitoring conducted? And this quote on the top, literally, it should be like tattooed on my forehead, because if I've heard this once, I've heard it 1,000 times. We have our mission statement for Degesch, but really this should be part of it. And if you're not monitoring, you're not fumigating. And that's true. If you're not monitoring, you're really just guessing. So technically, what is efficacy monitoring? It's a measurement of the fumigant concentration from inside of the target at the time of fumigation. How much gas is in there? That's really what we're talking about. How much gas is in is in your target. It's typically measured in parts per million or ounces, but really what it comes down to is this equation here. And for the fumigators in the room, you know, this is old hat to you, but it comes down to this equation, CTT. Time, obviously you can measure with your watch or a clock, temperature with a thermometer, but a critical part of this equation is concentration. And if you're not following through on that, and you don't know what your concentrations are, then you're potentially coming up with a bad math problem here, because CTT equals pest mortality. So if we're talking about it from an efficacy standpoint, and we're not measuring or we're guessing on one part of this equation, well, you're sort of gambling with the effectiveness of your fumigation. Now, where are these readings taken? I'm just going to spend a moment talking about this. Really, if you're fumigating a commodity, whether it's a grain pile, a silo, super sack, box, whatever it is, you really should be taking these monitoring readings from within that commodity, right? You don't just want to throw a test line into the airspace, because where the damage is occurring, the life stages of the pest, the most damage is going to be occurring in that commodity. You're trying to protect the commodity. You're not trying to protect the air. Now, of course, you want to kill the bugs in the air as well. But you need to be measuring if that fumigant is penetrating the way that you expect it to. And as I said here, you do so by probing. If there's no commodity, then you're going to take airspace readings, and we often suggest that you take airspace readings because it will help you understand whether, if you've got a sealed structure, it'll help you understand whether that fumigant has equalized, whether it's reached equilibrium. But at the very least, you should be taking commodity readings. Why? Why do we monitor for efficacy? Well, it's to ensure that you're fulfilling that part of the equation, the concentration part of that equation. A lot of times commodities and pests have specific ranges at which you need to fumigate at. And if you're not monitoring, you're guessing. So you need to know that you're there. And conditions in facilities change. I'm going to take a moment and tell you a little story. So Rob's a fumigator. Rob's a bad example. We'll just call him Bill. Bill's a fumigator. He's been fumigating for 37 years. By all accounts, he's a great fumigator. Kills the bugs, no problems. Well, Bob has earned his 2 weeks in Barbados with his wife, so he's going to go on vacation. Tells the company months in advance, all's good. Bob talks to Bill. Bill's his cousin. Bill works there. Bill goes and gets his fumigation license, and he's going to fumigate while Bob's out of town. Easy peasy. Leaves him a list of procedures. This is how we always do it. Goes about his business. So, was it Bob or Bill? Anyway, the guy that's not on vacation comes in. He goes to silo 16, puts in the prescribed amount of fumigant. 4 or 5 days, whatever the case is, goes by. They release it, ship it down the road to the customer. 2 weeks later, customer calls. We're not happy. Uh-oh, why? We got bugs. Okay, well, what Bob failed to mention is that on a real hot day in Omaha, up on top of the silo, that little vent that you sealed, sometimes if it gets to about 100 degrees, the adhesive on the back of the tape where you use the poly to seal, it kind of peels back a little bit, and you got to get up there and check that. Well, he forgot to leave that in his notes, right? The point is, if you're taking concentration readings, the reason that fumigation failed was because the concentration wasn't there. But if he had been taking concentration readings on day 2, 3, whatever it was, when the vent peeled back, he would have said, wait a second, we got a problem here. We need to get up there and check that vent, or we need to figure out what's going on. At least he would have investigated. Now, would that have completely saved the fumigation? Maybe not. He may have already lost his concentration at that point. But what it would have done is it would have helped him save face. It would have helped him protect his brand and not ship that buggy shipment down the road. So if he'd been taking concentration readings all the way, then he would have been protecting his assets. Also, it's a label requirement. And in our business, we always say that the label is the law. Most fumigants either directly express that you need to take readings or imply that you need to take readings. And if you're going to export, in the PPQ manual, most commodities that you're going to export have a threshold of ppm or ounces, depending on the fumigate you're using. So you're obviously going to have to take monitoring readings for that. But really, it's a transparency thing, at least from a fumigator's perspective. From our perspective, it's a transparency thing. It's a way for me to show you that you're getting what you paid for. The concentration was here. This is what we agreed on. It was here at this time. You should have dead bugs. And it's all in an effort to avoid the re's. Rejected shipments, refumigation, and hold on to your stomachs, recalls. So how do we monitor for efficacy? The process is actually quite simple. You install monitoring lines into the commodity as we talked about. You're gonna establish your target concentration, set your monitoring intervals, whether that's 6, 12, 24, 48 hours, whatever it is, as long as you're monitoring. And then you have to actually follow through, monitor, and document. Document, document, document. If you don't document, it didn't happen. So taking monitoring readings is one thing, but you need to be able to prove that you took them and what they were at what time. Monitoring devices, I don't want to get too deep into this, but really there's a bunch of different ways that you can monitor. There's an old school method with a hand pump and colorimetric tubes, calorimetric tubes. There's electronic devices that use electrochemical sensors. There's some emerging technologies with remote. Remote's been around for a while, but there's some really promising things that are coming down the pike with remote. And really all these things come with their benefits and their drawbacks. The pump and tubes, it's probably the least expensive, but it comes with the most amount of risk of human error. And then you go down the list, and when you go to remote monitoring, you cut out all the human error, and you may save yourself on some labor, but the expense is there. So it really comes down to your operation and what you see necessary. So we'll move on a little bit to bystander safety. These are really the people that are in the how do we apply fumigants safely slide. These are really the people that aren't really fitting into either one of those columns, or maybe they're fitting into both, but really these are the people that aren't directly involved with the fumigation. We start with the label, of course. Follow the label. Most fumigants have really clear-cut things, really clear-cut instructions on how to keep bystanders safe in the label. In some places, California, there are going to be some local rules and laws that supersede the label and go several steps further past what's required by the label. So just make sure that you're following up on that. This is an important one, though, educate and communicate. We talked about it in the other slide about educating everyone, right? Educating the administrative assistants, the truck drivers, the forklift drivers, everyone, even the people that aren't directly involved with the fumigation. But really, that's only half the battle, right? You've educated them on this, but you have to follow up with communication. It does you no good to educate someone. This is the fumigant, these are the risks, this is how to avoid it. But then you don't tell them, hey, by the way, or send out a mass email, whatever it is, hey, by the way, next Tuesday we're fumigating. If you don't follow through with the communication end of that, then their education may fall short. Sort of a physical way to keep bystanders safe is through placarding and establishing a perimeter, right? Placards are very important in the fumigation industry. It's important that they're correct, they have the correct dates on them. It's another one of your last lines of defense. We'll talk a little bit more about placarding here when I talk about never ever estimate, but placarding obviously is a label concern, so placarding and establishing a perimeter. And you do that by taking your concentration, not your concentration readings, your industrial hygiene or your low range readings outside of that structure, bin, warehouse, tarp, whatever it is. You're taking your concentration readings on the perimeter of that to make sure that there are no fugitive emissions coming out of your target. And if they are, then you need to create some sort of a physical, you either need to mitigate the fumigant that's coming out by sealing it better, by lowering a dose, or you need to establish some sort of a perimeter to which the fugitive emissions are lower than the label dictates, where you would have to use PPE. Aeration, we already spoke about that, but when it comes to bystander safety, one thing I like to say is that when you're a fumigator, or even if you're not a fumigator, if you're conducting fumigations on your site, right? Once you introduce that fumigant, you own that fumigant. You own every molecule of that fumigant, and you're responsible for that fumigant until it's released all the way down to a safe level, no matter where it goes. So when you go to aerate, let's just say it's, the level for phosphine is 0.3 parts per million, right? That's the safe level. It's your responsibility during aeration to make sure that no bystanders come in contact with levels above 0.3. And again, during aeration, that's the most likely time that that's going to happen. So security. This is a simple one. I'm going to be able to move pretty quickly past this one. Make sure that your facilities are locked, tagged out, placarded, but really make sure that they're locked, and only the fumigator or his or her agents have access to that. And the reason for that is I say never overestimate. I can't tell you how many times I've heard stories and seen people that will walk directly through a placarded door. Danger, warning, flagro, don't come in, caution tape. Rip the caution tape right down, walk right through. Thankfully, I've never seen that or been a part of that during an active fumigation, but because we placard a little bit early, I've seen that happen. And I've also seen it happen where individuals will accidentally leave their placards up after a fumigation, and people will just walk right through them. So make sure that your structures, your silos, whatever the fumigation areas are locked, under lock and key. And then we've talked a lot about monitoring IH low range readings. Really, that I can't express to you enough how important that is from a bystander safety perspective. Make sure that you're taking these readings for every fumigation at your facility and documenting them and mitigating the risk from the fumigants. Good. Okay. So we're going to move on to materials fumigated in transit. There's sort of two categories. We'll start with fumigated at origin. These are for the individuals that are fumigating actually on your property, right? Or you have PCOs that are fumigating on your property. The biggest and most important thing is that only by rail or sea, or by water, I should say, no public roads. At no time should anything under fumigation be moved on a public road. Obviously, you're going to follow the label for instructions on application. This is a little place where I didn't want to get too deep and get too biased with what fumigant you're using, but follow the label. There's going to be specific instructions for how to fumigate rail cars, how to fumigate barges, how to fumigate ocean-going motor vessels. There's going to be specific instructions in these labels, so just make sure that you follow those. And this is a good time for me to mention, actually, it falls both on the facility and on the fumigator that if you read through a label and there's something that you're unclear on, let's just say you have an abnormal circumstance or you're just not exactly clear on the language, it's the responsibility of the fumigator and his agents, right, to reach out to either the manufacturer or to an industry expert to get clarification on that. Because it's ultimately going to fall back to the fumigator and then fall back to you as the facility. So if you're unclear on any of that stuff, just make sure that you're following up. And here's the important part. The shipper or fumigator must provide notification to the receiver. Written, or I guess email, written. In some form or fashion, they must notify them, hey man, we got a rail car coming down the line. We fumigated it with this. Make sure you have your people in place on the other end. The applicator's manual of the fumigant used must be attached to the rail car or on board the motor vessel. And if you're doing it in-house, it's just a suggestion that you outline your procedure strictly according to the label. And if we go back a few slides, according to both the stakeholder and the fumigator's perspective. And then you need to make sure you document that. If you're subcontracting it, make sure that you request verification that the notification was sent, and make sure you have documentation of their procedures, that they were followed according to the label. This is sort of phosphine specific, but this is for those of you who are just receiving rail cars. A certified applicator and or a person with documented authorized training must supervise the aeration and release of these cars. So basically what that's saying is you don't necessarily have to have a certified applicator, a person with a license there, but they either need to be trained by a licensed applicator or go through the specific training requirements that are listed down here. It's based on the applicator's manual. They need to know how to aerate. They need to know how to transfer into another storage. And what I mean by that is if a rail car comes in and it's not quite released all the way, you can still transfer that into another storage vessel as long as you follow the proper safety protocols. You're monitoring the whole way, and then you have to re-placard the structure that you put it into. This can get interesting and complicated, but really it comes down to monitoring. Big surprise, right? It comes down to monitoring the whole way. So in transit, basically, the way we look at it is that you need to make sure that you either have a certified applicator there to receive, or you need to make sure that the person goes through the specific training requirements, and these are outlined in the label. So that sort of wraps it up. Just a quick summary. I know it was a lot. I tend to talk fast. I jump around a little bit. I'm getting used to this whole thing. I like to say I'm a father first, I'm a fumigator second, and I'm a speaker third. I'm trying to reverse those two to where I'm father, speaker, fumigator third. But just a summary to go through what we sort of discussed. Applying fumigants safely comes down to the labels, the training, and your procedures. And then you need to follow up and hold either your people, if they're your people on your staff, or your subcontracted pest control operators, you need to hold them accountable. Because you can rest assured that if something goes wrong, whoever it goes wrong to, they're going to be holding you accountable. So you might as well skip that step. Hold your pest control operators accountable from the outset. Monitoring for efficacy, it's really the only quantifiable proof you're going to have that you fumigated. If you're not monitoring, then you just say, well, we fumigated. Oh, really? That's cool. What are you going to show? I guess you can show them the empty packages of what you fumigated with, but that's not going to fly. If you're not monitoring, you're not fumigating, and then avoid the re's. Reshipment, refumigation, recall. Bystander safety, educate and communicate. Educate is worth nothing unless you communicate. And then obviously you want to placard and monitor the perimeter. In transit, you must provide documentation to the receiver, and the applicator or qualified person must release. I think I might have gone a little too quickly over that. Phosphine specific, you must be able to verify that the contents inside of that rail car, boxcar, barge are below 0.3 parts per million. Sorry, I went a little fast over that. So that's very important. For phosphine, you have to be able to verify that. It's in the label, which means it's the law. So, thank you. Appreciate it. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
All right. Thank you, Blake. Are there any questions, comments from the audience? Okay. Well, I do have a couple myself here. Well, I guess what are some of the of all the failed investigations? I guess what are the main reasons behind the failed that you're discussing? Obviously, some of the concerns.
Sure.
What are some of the prime reasons?
Well, I hate to belabor the point, but usually it will always come back to that CTT equation: concentration, time, or temperature. Usually, one of those, or more than one of those, has contributed to a failure. Time and temperature are sort of interrelated. So as the temperature goes down, the time that you need to fumigate will generally go up. And vice versa. If the temperature goes up, then your time will generally come down, all within the label constraints, right? But as a general rule, I would say that one of those, either concentration, time, or temperature, or more than one of those, has caused the failed fumigation.
And obviously, we have a lot of facility managers here,
right,
in the audience today. So I guess from that perspective, What can they do to economically maintain a safe environment for the fumigation?
So economically, I guess it's all relative when we go back to talking about small line item equals a massive cost. So at the surface, it may seem a little bit expensive to go out and either want to implement safety programs, number one, fumigation-specific safety programs. But more so than that, monitoring equipment's not that expensive in the grand scheme of things. And that's really going to be your biggest line of defense against a fumigation-related accident, is monitoring. So economically, I would say that it's all relative, Jess, but I think it's all economical, but you can get as inexpensive or cheap as you want. You can even go with the hand pump and the calorimetric tubes for low-range monitoring. And we're talking, probably less than $500. There's going to be some labor involved with it and some human error. Definitely suggest the electronic monitoring devices, but I would say that that's the most non-answer answer I can give you.
Well, I just know in this day and age with obviously increase in costs, I
Sure.
think everyone's looking for something the most cost efficient.
Yeah, and I hate to keep going back to it, but the cost is relative at this point. If you have if you don't take the steps to keep your facility safe during a fumigation, let's say you even spend $5,000 on it. I know it sounds like a lot, but at the end of the day, we talked about brand protection and showing up on the news. That's immeasurable. That amount of money is immeasurable. So it's a relative cost.
Okay. Thanks. So any other questions from the audience? Oh.
I can yell or project if that works.
Boy, you can.
Sure. When you're talking about the monitoring, and I'm a safety guy, not an operations guy, so I don't know the details of some of this stuff.
Yes, sir.
When you talk about the monitoring, is that a regulatory thing, as in you could be audited and asked for that documentation, or is that strictly a best practice for legal liability type issues?
Yes. I guess technically, if you're using the fumigant on your property, the fumigants have stipulations, direct stipulations for low-range monitoring, if that's what we're talking about, direct stipulations for that in their label, regulated by the EPA. So at that point, it's actually a law. It's not an audit situation. It's actually a law that you're monitoring on your property if you're conducting fumigations. Now, I'm assuming that they're not going to come down and beat down your door and put you in handcuffs, but if there were something to happen and you were to be subject to an audit, I would almost certainly think that the monitoring for safety is going to be a part of that.
So there was a OSHA citation issued in Kansas and settled in Kansas, I think it was last month, for not having an eye wash station at the storage location of the phosphine, which, since we run in Kansas, I started looking in to see if we had that at our facilities, and then it leads to, well, why would we need it at the location of the storage? We ought to have it at the location of where they're applying it, which then leads to, should we be having eye wash on our belt, or, so I've actually got those on order to take a look at to see how that is. But then looking in farther, I saw a couple different MSDSs. One said wear goggles, one that says wear eye protection. So, what should we be doing? When we look at the contractors, they're not wearing goggles. They don't have eye wash available, but I do now have an OSHA inspector in Kansas actively citing this, so trying to figure out and have ammunition as to what we should do.
So I guess the best way to answer your question is it's all going to depend on the individual situation. I'm assuming that when you're talking about the eye protection, eye wash, you're using aluminum phosphate. Okay. We always think that it's a great idea to have that stuff. I don't necessarily think that you need to wear it on your belt, especially if you're going to wear the eye protection. It's not necessarily mandated or regulated, it's suggested. I don't think that you need to go as far as keeping it on your belt, but definitely in a truck nearby or somewhere readily accessible. If you're way up in an elevator somewhere, it may be a good idea to put a station if possible, or a little mini station there. But the risk of, as long as if you're using aluminum magnesium phosphide, there's always going to be a little bit of dust involved. So at that point, that's when you would need to wear your eye protection. Well, you have to be careful though with the eye protection, and I don't want to go too far with this. You need to make sure that, I don't know if goggles are really the play, because what can happen is if you get that dust trapped inside of there, you run into an issue. So really some close-fitting sunglasses or safety glasses are probably your best play, and to have your eye wash close. And I know it doesn't completely answer your question, and to be honest with you, I don't have the exact answer. I haven't seen that OSHA violation. I haven't seen the literature on that. But I'm definitely going to look into it, and we'll talk offline.
Brian, quick question on that. So is that a programmed or unprogrammed inspection?
It was just a normal program show-up inspection.
And that's one of the things that they were actually looking for, or they just found? They were just kind of walking by?
Yeah, it's something they found, but once you have the inspector see that,
Yep.
they're going to look for it at the next one.
Yeah.
Because correct me if I'm wrong, Bart, it's not in our label, right? It's not.
Well, that's exactly right. So your question poses an interesting question because, to my knowledge, I'm a data tech as well. Eye wash stations are not required, but I think where they may have crossed the line is pesticide storages may require an eye wash station. Since you were storing a restricted use pesticide, that area was considered pesticide storage. So I think indirectly is how the OSHA violation may have come about. I'm going to look into this a little bit more, and we'll definitely talk.
Phosphine might be listed as corrosive, so if it's corrosive, then you need eye wash.
Right.
But the SDS does not require
No.
utilization of an eye wash station.
No.
Corrosive chemicals do, and then the MSDS, one MSDS for one of the brands said use goggles, another one said eye protection, but the label doesn't say anything about eye
Right.
protection. So you have disagreeing documents from your company and the other companies themselves, so it kind of leaves us in a bind.
For sure. We'll definitely take a closer look into it.
Sounds like a panel discussion for next year.
No, well, and thanks for bringing that to our attention, because I think I'd be interested. Obviously, we can chat about this offline too when you get more information. This is something we can, make aware to our members, and we can talk on when our Safety, Health, Environmental Quality Committee meets tomorrow too. I mean, that's an interesting topic. Any other questions for Blake? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you.